All right, well, I guess we can get started. We might have some other folks join us here, but thank you so much for coming tonight. I recognize several familiar faces. I am Tyler Alexander. I am a Richmond native. I grew up in town and attended Mount Mansfield, class of 2002. And then moved to the Northeast Kingdom, where I taught at North Country Union High School for 17 years. Hi, Mom. Yeah. Hi, Dennis. Okay. All right. But I just moved back to Richmond last summer, and it's been a lot of fun to get reacquainted with folks that I hadn't been in touch with for quite a while, and now I'm lucky to be teaching at CVU, and a couple of my colleagues are here tonight, so thank you, Annie and Carrie, and my other family members who are here, and everyone else, some of my former teachers at Richmond Elementary, so great to see you all. I'll just explain a little bit about the backstory of how I came across this and what the project has meant to me, and a few of the highlights of the story, and include some readings from the soldier that is at the center of the story, from the town of Glover, Vermont. Also, I just remembered this the other day. I think my very first exposure to the Civil War was from a book called Follow the Drinking Gourd, which I think my mom and dad checked out of the Richmond Free Library probably in the late 1980s. I think that's the very first time that I heard the word slavery. The Underground Railroad, maybe it's still here. Maybe it's still on your shelves. So the power of public libraries is important. So here's the cover of my book, and thank you to those of you who've already purchased it and who've already read it. Way to go. I'll try to keep this moving here, but I do want to share, again, some of the highlights and some of the most poignant excerpts from the book and really highlight what I believe the real significance of this is. So this is the soldier that is really at the center of the story. His name is Dan Mason from the town of Glover, Vermont. Can everybody hear me, by the way? Okay. And he was an enlisted man in the 6th Vermont Infantry and served in that unit for 3 years before becoming an officer in the 19th United States Colored Troops. And I'll mention how he ended up in that role. But I found his story, I've explained this in detail in the preface of my book, with my father while we were wandering around Westlook Cemetery in Glover, Vermont on Father's Day. And he pointed out the grave of Mason, and on one face of his headstone are listed all of the engagements that he served, that he fought in during the war. So it made an impression on my father, and he wanted to show this to me. And then later I realized that Mason's letters were in the Vermont Historical Society library in Barrie. So during COVID, I went down there as a COVID-era project and read through the letters and took scans and slowly, over the course of several years, transcribed them. That's half the battle. If you want to see what the originals look like, I've compiled them in a book back here. That was a lot of fun. I'll show you what some of them look like. And he also served in the same unit as my ancestor. And my cousins Alex and Eliza are here, so our mutual ancestor, who was also from Glover and served in the same unit, Company D of the 6th Vermont Infantry, so it had a deep personal interest to me. I thought I might learn more about my ancestor by reading these letters. And here they are. There's a lot of them. There's about 100 of them over the course of 4 years. And to read the originals in the Vermont Historical Society Library, it's a beautiful building, is a real thrill to handle these letters that were written 160 years ago. And he wrote these to his sweetheart, Miss Hattie B. Clark, Harriet Betsy Clark, who lived in West Glover. Here's one of the envelopes, just so you could see what they look like. And here she is. I don't know the exact date, but I think sometime around that era. And so part of what drew me to the story is this very rich, intimate human story that's timeless, of leaving home, being in love, desperately wanting to come back, not knowing how long this is going to go on for, and being willing to sacrifice everything for some cause greater than yourself. And here is one example of so many of his style and the kinds of things he would say to her. The first part of the subtitle here is a story of love, and this is really a love story. And this was early in the war, February 1862, before he saw any action, before anybody had any idea of how long this would last, when the expectation was that the war might be over with by summer. I consider you about perfect or as near to it as anyone. I know you to be the possessor of true patriotism. This you have proved by your actions. I honor and admire you more, yes, love you more if possible, than I did previous to your being brought to the test. I long for the time to arrive when peace shall be declared throughout the land, and the grand army of the Potomac and all the Union forces shall be disbanded and return to their respective homes. I long to grasp your loving hand and steal a kiss from your loving lips. I want you to make preparations to go somewhere with me to celebrate next 4th of July. I honestly expect to go to Vermont before 4 months shall pass away. So there's so many lines like this in these letters that are just like irresistible. And you can't help but get absorbed by the power of this story. And it's representative not just of one soldier, but of so many who lived through that time. But there's also aspects of this particular collection that are unique, that I thought were worth telling. It's also a story of loss. That's the second part of the subtitle. And I focused on the town of Glover up in the Northeast Kingdom, but I looked up some statistics from the town of Richmond just to give you a sense of the staggering losses that the nation endured that were unprecedented, and we've never seen anything like it since. There were 105 soldiers from Richmond who fought for the Union. And here are just the human toll of that conflict here in this town. 11 soldiers died from disease, the biggest killer. One died on the third day of the Battle of Gettysburg, buried right over here in this cemetery. 27 were wounded, and of those 5 died. Of their wounds received, 9 were taken prisoner. 1 of them died in a prison camp in North Carolina. So a total casualty rate of 37% right here in Richmond. So it's easy to forget the scale of suffering, the trauma that, imagine what that would feel like for the people here in Richmond or Glover or anywhere else. And here's this unit, Company D of the 6th Vermont. They were all from Orleans County. This was at Camp Griffin, Virginia, early in the war, but Richmond had many scenes like this. Company F of the 13th Vermont was mustered and organized right over here on Volunteers Green. So they tended to be organized at the county level. Each company would be. So, and of course, as I'm looking at this picture from early in the war, I can recognize faces from this and know exactly who didn't make it to the end. So here's what the originals look like. Here's just one excerpt, and I chose this because this was from September 17th, today, 163 years ago, at the Battle of Antietam. There's lots of descriptions of combat, of battle, and I'll read this to you. Here you can see what the cursive looked like. This is just a brief excerpt of one letter. The first night we laid and slept with the dead and wounded lying around us, some of the dead Rebs within a few feet of us. While we lay thus, several were wounded, fragments of shells and balls from the rebel sharpshooters. Friday morn before leaving, I went over the field. What a sight. I should say there was 2 dead Rebs to one of our men. In an old road in particular, they lay in heaps for a long distance in the cornfield just beyond. The ground was thickly dotted with them, but enough of this. Such looking faces, such a stench as arose, the heart sickens to tell. And I don't know what to expect from letter to letter, from page to page, and so I encounter something like this, and it's absolutely captivating. And knowing that this is the scene that he's witnessing, that he's describing on the deadliest day in American history. And what a turning point this particular engagement was, because it was enough of a victory for the Union that Lincoln went ahead and issued his Emancipation Proclamation 5 days later, which would transform the meaning of the war. So here's a guy from Glover, Vermont, who's witnessed this exact sight. You can't help but get drawn into this. And this is one of so many similar descriptions. Here's another. This is the Battle of Banks Ford, which was part of the Chancellorsville campaign in 1863. And this is a scene that was painted by the Vermont Civil War artist Julian Scott, and I included a detail of the scene on the right on the book cover. And long story short about this painting, I went on a wild goose chase trying to find out where the original is to get permission to feature it in the book, and I found that it was located in Texas at the University of Houston, and they told me just coincidentally, well, we're putting it up for auction in a few months. I said, we might be interested, so it's coming back to Vermont. And it's going to be displayed at the State House later this fall through the legislative session, next to Julian Scott's other paintings, including the Battle of Cedar Creek. And we're fortunate that Lyman Orton of the Vermont Country Store purchased it for the small sum of $149,000. So this is a really gripping scene, and Mason described this fight in vivid detail, and he commented about his friend, another Glover man, Hobart Bliss, was severely wounded in the left shoulder. As soon as it was dark, our whole force fell back to the river. Our pioneers brought Hobart far as they could and left him as the Reb skirmishers were close onto them. I fear he is mortally wounded, but hope he will turn up all right sometime. It seemed hard to leave him in the hands of the enemy, but such is war. And this individual did survive, but I can't make this kind of thing up. I found his diary in the Vermont Historical Society, and the original, and as I'm reading it, here he is, describes, it's hard to read, but May 4th, 1863, pleasant. The day starts pleasant. Firing along the lines, the Rebs in sight formed a line behind the 1st Maryland Battery, fought at sunset, drove Rebs, wounded, and laid on the field all night. So this is a grim story, and I've made sure not to glorify this in any way. And then the next day, wounded, laid on the field all day. Some Georgia boys fixed a shelter for me. Rained at night, wet and cold, and about played out all for the Union. So again, the story of loss, and one loss after another, after another, after another, after another, after another, after another. It keeps going on, and for me, reading these accounts, I'm just, hey Bob, welcome. It really overcomes you. You can't help but feel heartbroken, devastated. I know what's coming, but they don't. But to see that conviction, despite these staggering losses, is awe-inspiring. So it's also a story about a cause, the third part of the subtitle. And again, I didn't know what to expect when I started this. Would there be any references to the cause in these letters? Or would it just be a matter-of-fact description of, we moved here, and then we moved there, and then we ate this, and we were rationed this? Or would there be some reflection about the meaning of the cause? And here's just some numbers to take a look at. This is the election of 1860, where Lincoln won a plurality of the popular vote, but a decisive majority of the electoral vote. His name didn't even appear in the ballot in the southern states. But look at Vermont. 75% of Vermonters voted for Lincoln. And the issue in that election was whether or not slavery would expand into the Western territories. The Democratic Party was divided on this question. The Northern Democratic candidate, Stephen Douglas, advocated this idea of popular sovereignty, let each state territory decide for themselves on that question. The Southern Democratic candidate, John Breckinridge, said there can be no restrictions on the spread of slavery anywhere. And then there was a fourth candidate, John Bell, who ran on a vague platform that sidestepped the issue altogether. But look at Vermont's popular vote total. 75% voted for Lincoln, way more than any other state. And the columns are a little off here. I downloaded this from Google Slides. But anyway, you get the idea. New Hampshire, New York are, even Massachusetts, quite a bit less. So there's something in the water here. There's something that people, there's a reason why they supported Lincoln this much. And even 2 years into the war, that cause was debated and contested, and even in Vermont, there was hardly unanimous sentiment about what this war meant. Here's one explanation from the Burlington Weekly Sentinel, a Democratic newspaper, and the Democratic Party was by far the more conservative party at that time. And here's what they said. This was in response to the Emancipation Proclamation and the draft and the arming of black troops that Lincoln authorized in the Emancipation Proclamation. And they make it clear, if to prefer white men to Negroes, to yearn for and to esteem the restoration of the old Union as it was and the Constitution as it is, as of more importance than the perpetuity of the Republican Party, if so to think, say, and act entitle us to be stigmatized as copperheads and traitors, then we do cordially accept the epithet. It carries with it honor, not ignominy. My argument in the book, though, is that, yes, there are instances of that, but they are not the rule, at least here in Vermont. They are the exception to the rule. And I have encountered so much evidence to say that with confidence. And the bottom quote from our guy, Dan Mason, is, I think, more representative of public opinion here in Vermont. And you get a sense of his eloquence and style here. He wrote this to Harriet 2 days after Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address. Did he know about that, or is this just a complete coincidence? He makes many of the same comments. When one feels he is battling for the right, when he thinks of the principles he is supporting, when he thinks that he is knocking out the rotten, treacherous walls of slavery on which our government has tattered and reeled, threatening to engulf us from the commencement and substituting in place of the granite walls of freedom, when he thinks that his government is passing through the fiery ordeal, when he thinks that the eyes of all civilized nations are looking on, speculating whether a Republican government can sustain itself or not, then it is that the soldier's heart swells with emotions of pride and patriotism, and trusting in the God of battles, he nerves himself to the conflict. Under such feelings, the roar of cannon and the rattle of musketry and the din of war become grand and sublime. So, yeah, you can imagine the thrill when I read this, and I just feel, yes. Not, again, knowing what because, you know, I've seen plenty of other letters which express more of the sentiment on the top. But they are, again, the exception in Vermont. So it's also this deeply personal human story. He came back to Vermont 3 times throughout the course of the war on furloughs. And this letter gives us some idea of what that experience would have been like, to come home and then leave again. This is what he told Harriet, and by the way, we don't have any of her letters to him, unfortunately, and for the simple reason that he burned them upon receiving them. Very concerned about maintaining privacy and secrecy and not revealing any intimate details to his fellow troops. That was customary at that time. Martha Washington burned all of George's letters, for instance, so it's not totally unusual, but I wish I had just one of her letters. But we get some glimpses of who Harriet is and what her attitudes are through his writing. So here he says, perhaps a short sketch of my experience, journey, etc., since leaving you would be interesting to you. I got home about 1:30 o'clock that night, crept softly up the back way to my chamber, and was soon lost in the land of pleasant dreams. Slept about 2 hours, got up and made arrangements for leaving. Father carried me out to Barton on horseback. I had a worse time leaving Emily than you, his sister. These women's tears are terribly affecting. I was so glad you held out bravely to the last. Dare say you had a good cry, as you tell about, after I left. And doubtless a sleepless night, but I hope not. What a night that was. I believe I never enjoyed myself so well before, yet it was a sad time. But enough of this. Harriet, you shan't laugh at me, but I believe I am homesick, lovesick, or something else. I never have felt so discontented since I have been in the service as now. You don't know how I long to see you. I don't know, but it has cured me of the re-enlist fever. I can't bear the thought now. A commission would not tempt me, feeling as I do today, but perhaps when I get back to the army, I shall think differently. Harriet, your image will rise before me at all hours in the day, but I must be reconciled to my lot. So when he gets back to Virginia, it's now 1864. What does he do? He re-enlists, and he tells her, I'm going through this pretty quickly here. He tells her why. He says, I can't, as much as I want to come home, I can't leave the service as long as there is war in the land. And trust me, I'd love to come home, but I just can't do it. And he says something to the effect of, I learned that you are not reconciled to my re-enlisting. And then he goes on to lecture her about how she should take the correct view of the matter and support him. So there are definitely some moments in his writings that might offend modern sensibilities, but he re-enlists, and this time as a captain in a black regiment, the 19th United States Colored Troops. And that process is a whole long ordeal. He had to go to Washington, D.C. before an examination board. It would be a very rigorous exam, not just military tactics, but you had to demonstrate your knowledge of Greek and Latin and mathematics and history and science, biology. So he passed. He passed the first grade, and he became a captain. And he told Harriet that, hey, this is going to be nice because I'm going to get paid a lot more. But I do believe in making soldiers of them. And he wrote many letters home to his local newspaper, the Orleans Independent Standard. And the resolution's a little blurry, but if you look at the masthead, you could see their phrase, no more compromise with slavery. And that had been published on their masthead beginning in 1856, 5 years before the war. So again, it gives you a sense of where public opinion was. And he describes his first experience commanding this black unit, and at the end he says, I think they will endure far more than white men. I find they have a much better understanding of matters pertaining to our government than many suppose. I have no doubt, but they will fight desperately. But there is this incredible debate about the arming of black troops, and it's very controversial. And so Mason's sentiment is noteworthy. I encountered plenty of other excerpts like this. This is written by another Vermont soldier to a Burlington newspaper who said that the Negro freed from slavery is almost utterly helpless and is dependent upon the advice and instructions of others. A people who have been so entirely kept under, so thoroughly under the sway and upon the support, advice, and assistance of the whites must have their manhood degenerated. Like a dog or a child who has always been harshly ruled and punished, loses spirit and courage. For these reasons, I have not much confidence in the Negro as an active soldier, though behind breastworks and urged on by others, he might make a fair resistance and something of a fight. So I haven't shied away from any of this. I haven't glossed over it. I haven't tried to offer any kind of sanitized view of where attitudes were on these questions. One really powerful experience that Mason had was at the Battle of the Crater in Petersburg, Virginia, on July 30th, 1864. Many historians have described this as the most violent, brutal combat of the entire war. To make a long story short, I've gone into all the details about this particular action. There was a big debate between the Union High Command about who's going to lead the attack. General Ambrose Burnside wanted his black division under the command of General Edward Ferrero to lead the assault. And then at the last minute, they were removed by George Meade, U.S. Grant, worried that lots of things could go wrong. If the attack fails, that's not going to be good politically. It's an election year. It's July, the summer of 1864. Lincoln is facing a very tough re-election prospect that fall, and the momentum was not going with the Union at this point in the war. Grant's army had stalled outside of Petersburg. So there was this plan to pack 4 tons of explosives under a Confederate salient and blow it to Kingdom Come and penetrate through their defenses. Grant reluctantly agreed to this. He thought it was a little bit harebrained, but they went ahead, and instead of, when the Black Division was pulled from the vanguard of the assault, the other 3 division commanders drew straws to decide who's going to lead the attack. And 2 of those white division commanders were drunk at 4:45 in the morning when the mine was exploded and weren't there leading their divisions. And it was a horrifically brutal attack. 4,000 Union casualties in one day. And what happened was cold-blooded murder. Confederates made clear that they would not treat black soldiers as legitimate combatants, as prisoners of war, and either killed them point blank after surrendering, ran them through with bayonets, or sold them back into slavery. And this is Mason's description of that. He's right in the thick of it. He says, yesterday, the 30th was the longest day I ever experienced. I think I never was under quite as hot a fire. I don't see why I was not wounded. All day, we lay under a terrible fire from the fort on both flanks. I lost 1 killed and 15 wounded. Many of those wounded would end up dying. I had a ball put through my coat sleeve just above my elbow of my right arm, grazing my arm so that it is purple today. I was once completely covered with dirt, so I could hardly crawl out by the explosion of a mortar shell. I saw one man blown up at least 20 feet. He came down in a good many pieces. I think the affair was very poorly managed. I must now close so as to send this out tonight. Remember me to all the friends, from your lover, Dan. And because of the racial politics, these wounded black soldiers were not evacuated. Normally there would be a flag of truce, and they could receive medical assistance and be sent to the rear, but that didn't happen here. It was 100 degrees, and so they lingered for 2 days. So a lot of soldiers who could have been saved ended up dying. And the black soldiers under Mason's command, I found records in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. from their wives, their widows, who tried to claim a pension after this and couldn't because there was no record of the marriage. They couldn't prove that their husband was actually their husband. They couldn't prove that their children were actually their children because there's no birth certificates. There was no 14th Amendment yet, which included the birthright citizenship clause. That didn't exist. So it was a really hard legal battle to get a pension. And Mason, after this, is clearly shaken and rattled, and I'm convinced that he wrote a letter to Harriet contemplating a resignation, leaving the service on less than honorable terms that she did not save. It's not in the collection. And his next letter, which is some 2 or 3 weeks later, I'm sure he wrote one in between, he thanks her for calling him back into the line of duty and saving his honor. She must have said, "Don't do it." So he doesn't want to disappoint her. That would be a strong motive. So he stays in the service. I don't know exactly what he had in mind, but he clearly was shaken by this. And the Democratic press, this is an election year, of course, they are quick to jump to conclusions about who is to blame for the failure of this attack. And here's one example from a Vermont newspaper in Montpelier. Burnside, Ambrose Burnside, the Union General, he is now entitled to be called the emancipator. This is sarcastic. He emancipated any question of Negroes at Petersburg, and not only emancipated the Negroes, meaning killed them, but he also emancipated a great many people from the idea that the colored troops could fight. Here's a Baltimore newspaper, same kind of headline here. The colored troops give way, extraordinary efforts to rally them. And then Mason writes another letter back home to the newspaper, and he says this: "I did not see a colored man offered to run until the advance, which was composed of white men, came pell-mell over the works, officers and men very much demoralized. I don't think we ought to blame the colored men for running when the white veterans of many a hard-fought field, whom they have been well taught to imitate, break and refuse to be rallied. But I do know that some of them did stay at the fort and fought manfully, side by side with the white men who could not see the point of leaving a position so dearly bought, but were compelled to retreat or be taken prisoners. The above I know to be a fact. Your humble servant might have been seen about that time making rapid strides to the rear. It is a remarkable fact that not one of them was observed to look pale when the missiles of death were falling thickly around and our men continually falling. I think this ought to be enough to satisfy any reasonable man that colored men can't be frightened easy." And so this is the issue that is on their minds leading into a very closely contested election. The men at the front are debating their support for Abraham Lincoln or his opponent, George McClellan. The Democratic platform called for an immediate cessation of hostilities. We're tired of the war. We're sick of it. It's a failure. The policies of the Lincoln administration have failed. Let's stop the bloodletting. Let's negotiate with the South. Their platform made no mention of slavery at all, and just simply promised to restore the Union as it was. And Republicans said, well, what do you mean? The South seceded from the Union as it was. Like, why? We're not going to turn back the clock to the 1850s. What's the point? And here's the Republican position in 1864. Resolved that as slavery was the cause and now constitutes the strength of this rebellion, and as it must be always and everywhere hostile to the principles of Republican government, justice, and the national safety, demand its utter and complete extirpation from the soil of the Republic. And that, while we uphold and maintain the acts and proclamations by which the government, in its own defense, has aimed a death blow at this gigantic evil, we are in favor, furthermore, of such an amendment to the Constitution to be made by the people in conformity with its provisions as shall terminate and forever prohibit the existence of slavery within the limits of the jurisdiction of the United States. And that amendment would be the Constitution Day today. It's Constitution Day. Did you read it? Okay. So a little civics quiz. What amendment are we talking about? 13th. Yes. Well done. Okay. So the Republican Party makes it very clear where they stand. This is the platform that Lincoln runs on. And he's encouraged, even by some of his aides, to walk back his promise on emancipation and maybe try to negotiate with the South. And he says, no, I would be damned in time and eternity for so doing. And there were some calls for him to postpone the election, declare a national state of emergency. How can we hold a free and fair election in the midst of a civil war? No nation in the history of the world has ever done this. He said, we're going to. And the soldiers in the field will be able to vote by mail-in ballot. I want them to vote. And they did, by 75%, to Lincoln over McClellan. McClellan, who'd been a very popular general with the Union troops. And in the midst of all this, Mason writes another letter to Harriet, and he says this, I also sent a picture taken from another paper, which is a great picture, the soldier on his crutches, the goddess of liberty weeping over the graves of heroes sacrificed in a useless war. All combined makes me disgusted with the peace policy of the Democratic Party. That defiant rebel with his whip in hand with the enslaved around him disgusts me. I say, fight them. And I don't know what picture he's talking about, but clearly it made an impression on him, but it doesn't take me long to find what it is. It's Thomas Nast's cartoon from Harper's Weekly. This is it. This is what he's referring to. It's such a thrill to find these things. And here's a defiant rebel with his whip in his hand, with the enslaved behind him, the goddess of liberty weeping over the graves of heroes sacrificed in a useless war. The peace policy disgusts me, I say, fight them. There's no sympathy with the rebels. To Mason and most of the Vermont soldiers who fought with him, they're traitors, period. And they want them hanged. They make that clear, too. So, again, this is kind of a blurry image, but you could see here in Chittenden County, again, this is not the exception to the norm. It is the norm. Here is the tally for Lincoln in Richmond. For instance, it's 150 votes to Lincoln, for Lincoln to 22 for McClellan. So this is solid Republican territory. 29 of our 30 state senators at that time were Republican. All of our congressional delegation supported Lincoln and spared no words in denouncing slavery, calling for the vigorous measures to prosecute the war. Let's see, Huntington, 180 to 19. So huge margins for Lincoln. And this was true not just here in Chittenden County, but and everywhere else in the state, too. In fact, Burlington was probably the most conservative place in the state at the time. The more rural areas tended to be more liberal on these questions, interestingly. So, anyway, Lincoln wins. The beginning, it's the beginning of the end. Robert E. Lee weeps when he hears about the result. And now it's just a matter of time. Mason comes back home in March of 1865 for his third time in the war, and he gets married. And this is something that so many soldiers did. They came home, even though they knew they were going back, they were very anxious to get married. One is so that if they die, their wives can collect a pension. Also, it's part of the moral climate of the time as well. And so he comes home and he gets married and he has a whirlwind honeymoon and he has to go back to Virginia, and then he gets sent to Texas. And that's a whole other story that I've gone to in detail in the book. It's a little-known campaign. It has a lot to do with racial politics. White soldiers, of course, are getting mustered out and going home. Black soldiers remain. They get sent to the least desirable locations. They go to Brownsville, Texas, on the Rio Grande, and the morale really plummets because that's the last place they want to be, and they just can't wait to get home. And here's his letter to Harriet from July of 1865. The war's ended, but he's down in Texas. How I would like to meet you once more and just smother you with kisses. Now he's talking to his wife. If no one was looking, how happy we will be. If we can ever get us a home by ourselves, we shall be so happy and satisfied with each other. When we are alone, we can act as we please and do many things that some people would call silly. But if we enjoy it, it is no one's business. Oh, Harriet, my darling, how dear you are to me. If I can ever get back to you, I shall be perfectly happy. You are all that I could ask for. My precious, darling wife, I must be with you. My other friends, though dear, seem distant compared with you. How can I express my love to you? Words fail to convey my feelings. It is useless to try. But, my precious one, if I can get home this fall, we will renew the honeymoon so suddenly brought to a close last spring, and we will just visit and live so happy. If we can both be well, we will have just as good a time as ever was had in this world. Oh, woman, virtuous woman, how near an angel you approximate. Thank you. I take my inspiration from Dan. I try to be as charming. Yes. Okay. Well, I won't say any more about that, but he's also very concerned about her development. He asks her in several letters about her development. So, all right. You'll have to read the book to find out what happens, but so just to close with, I figured I'd share a few words from his fellow troops that he served with. This one is Lieutenant Fred Kimball from the town of Glover, who was in the 6th Vermont, and these veterans would gather every summer for annual reunions right up through the 1920s, even into the 1930s for those who still were alive. And they would, there was a lot of speech making and oratory and remembrances about what they had endured and the cause for which they had fought. And here's just an example of the kinds of things that they were saying. This is now 1880. Reconstruction had officially ended in 1877. And here's what Lieutenant Kimball had to say from Glover, Vermont, not an elite, a farm boy from the Northeast Kingdom. And he said, when we see the freed people of the South turned over to the slave oligarchy, and even now virtually disenfranchised, and reduced to a condition little better than that of absolute slavery, may we not feel, and justly too, that the loyal North has been hushed into a lethargy by the sophistry of the South, until the government, saved at such a fearful cost, is almost captured by its enemies, and the fruits of that terrible contest in danger of being overthrown. Let us not mock our honored dead by speaking eulogies today, but rather let us bow our heads in shame above their hallowed graves and swear by the great eternal upon the altar of our country that we will never lay off the armor until these wrongs shall be righted, until the liberties of the people shall be made secure, until the rights of every citizen shall be respected and protected, until life and property are safe wherever our flag flies, until every citizen can cast a vote expressive of his honest sentiments without fear of molestation, and have that vote honestly counted, and until loyalty at least shall be made respectable, if not treason odious. And the last word I thought this would be appropriate. I'll give to Senator George Edmunds, born in Richmond, Vermont, and was a longtime member of our congressional delegation. And he traveled down to Gettysburg in 1889 to dedicate the Vermont monuments there, including to the 1st Vermont Brigade. And the governor of Vermont was there as well, and many veterans. I've seen them. They're worth going to. If you ever have a chance to visit Gettysburg, please go see the Vermont monuments there on Cemetery Ridge and behind Little Round Top on the Union left, where Mason was, where my ancestor was, arriving on the day of the 2nd, July 2nd, to bolster the Union left when it came close to breaking. And here's what Senator Edmunds said: "But even now, after a quarter of a century, it is apparent that the full and final benefit and beneficence of the great sacrifice is not yet reached. In many of the old slaveholding commonwealths, there has existed and continues to be methodically practiced a systematized repression of the liberated race and of those white citizens who defend its rights of free speech and lawful voting, and which not only robs the citizens of all other states of the full weight of their just and lawful influence in the legislation of the country, but which in its various forms of fraud, tyranny, violence, and cruelty sets at naught those essential principles of social order and morality, without the practice of which no free and Christian society can exist. These things affect the welfare and the true life of every part of the Republic, and it is the duty of every citizen of whatever race, creed, or party to exert himself to bring them to an end. Until secure and peaceful freedom and equality, both political and civil, come to every citizen of every state, these monuments will not have shown their full and true significance. So, Richmond born, Senator George Edmunds, photographed here by Matthew Brady. I thought those would be fitting words to leave you with. So, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the story and are maybe inspired to read the book and learn a little bit more about the most polarizing event in our country's history, and maybe find the meaning in this story and learn more about the men and women from Vermont who gave the last full measure of devotion to the Union's cause and were committed to the principle that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. So thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions. And Maria from Hyperbole Books is back here. If you'd like to purchase a book, and I'll be happy to sign it and patronize a local business. Thank you, Maria. Are any questions? Any? Yes.
I know you mentioned that your father, you went to the cemetery, saw his grave. How did you know there were letters? I may have just missed that, how you came across all of his letters.
Luck.
Okay. Did you go research to see if he had letters, or did you just happen to be going through and recognize the name?
I was looking through their catalog, the catalog of the Vermont Historical Society Library, which they have a vast collection of Civil War letters there. So does UVM. And you can filter by unit, and so I think I typed in 6th Vermont, and sure enough, okay, here are these letters, and wow, these look interesting, and oh, Mason, I saw his grave. And he was from Glover, and also not only is it a story about him, but I found so much other material from other members of his unit, other members of his town, all of the soldiers that he tented with, that he shared a tent with. I found all of their letters. Another one of them joined the United States Colored Troops. Kimball here served in the Freedmen's Bureau after the war, got harassed by the Klan down in Virginia. His wife had to draw a pistol and point it right at the head of a Klan member to save his life. So, I just can't make this stuff up. So, yeah.
And also, I just want to say I'm sorry that you don't have any of her letters back.
Oh, it's devastating. Yes. Any other? Yeah, hi, Mom.
Hi. Can you describe what you described on the video of the CBU about when, at the end of the school year, your RISE program took you, and you talked about that student in the video?
Yeah, I had an opportunity to take some of my students up to Glover this past spring. It's part of a place-based learning program that we have at the end of the year, and visited Mason's home, which is just a cellar hole deep in the woods of Glover. But we met with the current landowner who gave us a tour and tried to identify, okay, where's the barn foundation, where's the root cellar, what's this feature, what's that feature. which was really interesting. And then went to Harriet's home, which is still standing, and met with the current owner there, who gave us a tour, and nothing has changed since the 1860s. That house is a time capsule. And I read a letter from Mason that he wrote to Harriet, commenting about how many hours he spent in her father's parlor late at night, and how he was daydreaming about that. And I had a student who said, wait a minute, like, where am I right now? Like, just that sense of time travel, and am I in 1865? Just that feeling, I don't know if I could really describe it, but that you get when you go to these kinds of places and you see ghosts, I guess, or you could feel that presence. So that was fun. Any other questions? Yes?
I'm always kind of curious about, I have like some critical stuff from the Civil War, and I'm always struck by like how kind of the doldrum, boring, like life a lot of the times, and then like it has pieces of like combat. And I'm curious, like, do the letters talk about that too, like what like everyday life was like, or is it mostly focused on like significant events like the prayer or Antietam or
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of that. Just the day-to-day detail of camp life and the boredom and all the coping mechanisms that would accompany that, including alcohol, which Mason condemned, and gambling. Mason said to Harriet, you have no fear of me having any inappropriate intercourse with woman since I've donned the blue uniform. I can't say the same of most of my fellow troops. And that was especially true in the winter when there wasn't any real active campaigning. So there's plenty of details in there. And you see that especially in diary entries. Not so much in letters written home, but especially in diary entries which record, rationed soft bread today, ate hard bread for dinner, that kind of detail. Yeah, Clint.
You talked about the frequency of the letters.
Yes.
Every couple weeks, every month?
Great question. He had an unofficial policy that he wouldn't send her a letter till he got one in return. And that we would get very irritated when there was a delay. But, of course, especially when they're on the move, it's hard for the mail to catch up to them.
And what was the mail service like? What was that?
Very good. And if I'd go back to the beginning here, this envelope, there's no zip code, there's no street address, it's just West Glover, Vermont. But it would take about a week.
A week.
Yes, to get from Vermont to Virginia. And also, a lot of times soldiers would get care packages with perishable goods, cheese and butter and strawberries and pies sent from home because the mail system was quite good. Yeah, Bob.
Hey, Todd, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. I know I'm a teacher too. So I know that have you ever read any of these letters out loud to your students? Because I have. And they look at me like, how could people write like that back then? And I'm like, well, they had the advantage of a one-room schoolhouse with 12 grades and oil lamps. So maybe that gave a little flavor. But that's a comment on our education system nowadays. And I wrestle with that all the time. I'm just wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, all of my students write just like this, Bob. But yes, I think Vermont cared a lot about public education, and I think you see a testament to that. James McPherson stated, and I quoted him, that the New England led the world in literacy in the mid-19th century. 95% of people in New England could read and write. So something worked, they read a lot. Mason's quoting Hamlet. He's quoting British poets. He's quoting, of course, the Bible and Scripture. So literacy was important. Okay, yeah, Mr. Forward.
It's good to see you.
Yes.
So you began your research in 2020,
Yes.
and this was just recently published.
Correct.
So how do you feel how your research and the time that you were researching, how it resonates today? You know, that a lot of what you say could have been written this week, it seems. The controversy. Do you feel that it's resonant of today, and there are lessons for us from this division today?
Well, thanks for bringing that up. I'm a public school teacher and I'm on camera, but I'm glad you mentioned that. Yes, this is, like I said, I didn't know what to expect when I started this. I had no agenda. I had no thesis, argument in mind. I would just I would follow the evidence wherever it led me. And I didn't know where it would lead me. I think historians tell you don't put the cart before the horse. But I just was struck how many times I kept seeing the same rhetoric and sentiment and genuine concern about, and very strong language about how slavery was a sin that had blotted the soul of the nation since the founding, and that we needed to cleanse ourselves and purify ourselves through bloodshed. And it's what Lincoln said in the second inaugural address, that the war was God's punishment for the whole nation for the sin of allowing slavery. So it wasn't just the Lincolns and the George Edmunds, other elites saying this. It was also rank and file soldiers who had the most to lose from continuing the war and were the most willing to continue fighting until, as Lincoln said in the second inaugural, every drop of blood drawn by the lash shall be paid with another drawn by the sword. That resonated. So hope that answers your question, but thank you for raising it. Yeah. Anybody else? Annie?
I was curious, it seems like Dan is pretty honest in his letters home, but I'm curious if you have a sense of whether in his particular letters or in general, whether soldiers were holding things back from the people that they loved because they're seeing these horrific, deeply traumatic events daily sometimes. Mm-hmm. Do you have a sense of that with him or in general?
That's a great question. I would imagine that it's hard for anybody who's experienced this to describe it to somebody who hasn't been there. With that said, I think he was honest, and many of these descriptions are graphic, like this one, describing the bloody lane at Antietam, or this description of Banks Ford. I've only included a small part of it. The full letter is in there and goes into a lot of other detail about how the 6th Vermont advancing here yelled hideously, demonically, with demonic fury as they were charging with fixed bayonets, loading and firing as fast as we could, pouring it into them. So there are a lot of those descriptions. And I think I'm making a generalization, but letters written to a significant other would be more honest than to a sibling or a parent or an aunt or uncle. I think you do get more intimacy in general. And here, again, is his description of the crater. That would be hard to read, right? I saw a man blown up at least 20 feet. He came down in a good many pieces. I mean, if this were to ever become a screenplay, what would that look like? Not that it will, but, right? That's a pretty graphic image. Other questions? Yes?
Just a comment.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes, as a full-time educator, I'm pleased that you had time to do this large work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, yes. Thank you. Thank you, yeah, a lot of late nights after my kids went down and Sunday mornings before they got up in the summer, of course, so. Well, thank you to all of you who read it and have taken an interest in the story, and I think Vermont can be proud of where we stood at this time, and there's, of course, some moments here that would make us raise our eyebrows at certain terms and language that were used at the time, but I think overall, I'll just say it, I can't help but admire Dan Mason. I've never done anything like this. I've never been called upon to do anything like this. I yes, yeah, right, yeah. So, yes, I have enormous respect for veterans like Bob and anybody else in here who donned the nation's uniform and defended us. I'm in no position to minimize that kind of idealism and bravery. So, thank you.